Good evening, everyone. This is Dawn, Innovation Division Education Chair. On behalf of ASQ Innovation Division, I would like to welcome you all to this webinar. The topic of tonight's webinar is ISO 56000 Innovation Management. ISO 56000 is the Innovation Management series of standards. The new Innovation Management System standard ISO 56002 will be published this year. It is a structure to integrate with ISO 9001-2015. This is a guidance standard and will enable an organization to prepare for a conformity assessment standard. The learning objectives are to understand the ISO 56000 family of standards, to understand the flow of the management system standard ISO 56002, to understand how to integrate ISO 56002 with ISO 9001. Please note that this webinar is recorded and the recording will be available on ASQ Innovation Division YouTube channel. Also, there will be 5 to 10 minute time after the presentation for questions and answers. Please post your questions on the Q&A section of the WebEx tool. Tonight, our presenter is Mr. Peter Merrill. Thank you very much, Peter, for accepting to be our speaker today. Peter Merrill is a keynote speaker on innovation and has keynoted at conferences in cities such as Dubai, Mumbai, and Shanghai. He has spoken in Prague, London, and Helsinki. He began his career in R&D working on projects such as desalination and acrylics for carbon fiber. Later, as chief executive of one of the leading design brands in Europe, he led innovation in one of the most demanding markets. He's an engineer, an artist, and a writer, and has led innovation in the fields of both graphic art and engineering. He is one of the North America's foremost authorities on management systems, which he has implemented in such innovative companies such as IBM, AIG, and RIM. He was founding chair of the ASQ Innovation Division. He currently chairs the Canadian National Committee to ISO TC 279, the Technical Committee on Innovation Management, and also chairs the ASQ Innovation Think Tank. He is author of the books Innovation Generation, Innovation Never Stops, The Executive Guide to Innovation, and Do It Right the Second Time. He writes the innovation column for Quality Progress. Now I'd like to hand over to Peter Merrill. Peter, please take it away.
Dawn, thank you very much. Well, good evening, everyone. Let me take you into our first slide. And what I'm already finding, bear with me, is that my keyboard is not giving me a movement on the slides, which is not what I wanted. So bear with me on this. Okay, just a minute. Let's see. Thank you for your patience, everyone. So, Dawn, this is something we didn't test beforehand.
Yes, maybe you can use your mouse for.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, and it's not letting me. It's not letting me move. It's not letting me move the slide. So there's something strange going on. Let me try a different approach. Instead of using my keyboard mouse, I'm just going to plug in an external mouse to my laptop, and let's see if that will move the slides. So, yes, we have success.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you for your patience, everyone. That was a nasty moment. That was something I just did not expect to happen. Normally, when I'm doing a webinar, I just quickly go back and forward a couple of slides, make sure everything's okay. I didn't do it this time. Okay, so let me explain to you, first of all, what is ISO 56000? First of all, I want to tell you that it's a recent numbering that originally this standard was given a very forgettable number, and through last year we put a lot of pressure on ISO Central Secretariat to give us a number in around 1,000. That's important in terms of marketing a standard, and I was I was given the job of being point man on that, so I claim the pain and the success in making that happen. So we've now got the 56,000 series. It's an innovation management system, very much like ISO 9001. Over 40 countries have been involved in developing this standard. It follows the ISO common high-level structure, and that's really important for people who are using other ISO standards. For instance, the obvious one is 9001, but other ones like, say, the environmental standard, which is one in which, for example, innovation plays a big part. That common high-level structure I'm going to explain to you in a moment, but just to give you a feel for what it consists of, it's got a standard core text, and so that standard core text represents around about 20% of the total text in a given standard. More importantly, though, it's got a common structure, which I'm going to show you, and the alignment with 9001 I will highlight for you. For those of you who are actually familiar with 9001, you'll see how easily the two standards can, in fact, integrate. So the standard has got a number of supporting standards which are in development at the moment. 56002, which is my focus tonight, is the guidance standard. We've deliberately written this first before moving to a conformity assessment standard. 9001, for example, is a conformity assessment standard. It's auditable. We took the decision that having the guidance standard first would be a better first step so that we could build the body of knowledge that is required. At the same time, in parallel with that, we've developed 56,000, which is the fundamentals and the vocabulary, rather like 9,000 is fundamentals and vocabulary for 9001. Then a number of supporting standards. Partnership is 56,003. It's called that, but if you think of it as collaboration, that's really what that standard is all about. And it's a very good guidance on how to set up partnerships, say within a corporation or with outside organizations. 56,005 is intellectual property. That's getting a lot of attention, and of course everybody is very sensitive about the issue. That addresses things like how to protect your own intellectual property, but also how to make sure that you're not infringing on other people's intellectual property. That standard's well on its way. Strategic intelligence, that is just beginning, so I won't say too much about that. And idea management also just beginning. There is a technical report, which is 56,004 on assessment, but I want to stress that is not assessment of a management system. It's just assessment of innovation management. So this is a skeletal representation of the ISO high-level structure. And starting at the left-hand side of the model, it follows the scientific method that Francis Bacon developed way back in the year 1600. You know, it's that far back. Scientific method was kind of hijacked in the 20th century by Deming and Schuhart and called the Plan, Do, Check, Act Schuhart model. But if you look to the original scientific method, it actually is more than plan, do, check, act. It is observe, plan, do, check, act. And that observe part, particularly important when you're looking at innovation. So if you look at clause 4, which is the first of the actual, shall we say, to-do parts of the standard, context, that is where we identify, where we observe what are the forces acting on an organization. Then the job of leadership is to analyze those forces and, having evaluated their impact, set direction for the organization. And then we get into the core of the model, where we create our plans, evaluate our risks and opportunities. Then we get into the doing part, which is operations, the checking part, which is performance evaluation, and then the act part, which is continual improvement. And at the heart of all of this is clause 7, which is support, and that deals with things like infrastructure, competence, all of the things you need right at the heart of the organization. This model you see here was our original prototype when we developed the standard. And it's got a bit more complicated since the original, but I like this original. It really gives us a good picture of how the different pieces fit together. So let me take you into the first of those clauses, context. And this is where, again, for those of you who are familiar with 9001, you'll be very familiar with this, where we identify the external and internal issues that impact an organization. Well, in the world of innovation, we give this a lot more attention. We recognize that these are where we see our initial opportunities. But at the same time as we're doing that, we need to be thinking about who are the people who might benefit from us leveraging those opportunities. And that's the interested parties. And the difference from a quality management system is that in the case of innovation management, our customers don't yet exist. We will look at existing customers, but we will look at potential customers. We will look at all sorts of people that we might partner with. So the interested parties element has a lot of meaning when we're looking at innovation management. And then the scope of the innovation management system. This is going to be a moving target when you're doing innovation management. You're going to find that one of the attributes for successful innovation is agility. And so we can expect to be regularly reviewing scope. And then last of all is culture and collaboration. And those are two big add-ons for innovation management. And I'll come to those shortly. But the way we start in clause 4 is classically by doing a SWOT analysis. And this is a tool that businesses use for many years. And in the world of quality, we look at weaknesses and threats, and we evaluate the consequent risk. Whereas in the world of innovation, we will look at opportunities and evaluate what are the threats and the risk that attach to a given opportunities. Same tool, different use. So I mentioned that I would give you a bit of a deeper dive on culture and collaboration. Here are some of the important issues that we have to consider when we are developing innovation management. First of all, it's necessary to have a good quality management system, because you can come up with the best ideas in the world, but if you don't execute, you're wasting your time. And a big challenge is getting the creative aspect of innovation to coexist with the execution aspect of quality management. And one of the things we have to do is challenge existing assumptions. We have to think about how creativity is going to coexist with the changes that need to take place. We're going to be thinking about risk-taking and experimentation in the culture. And it's going to be a learning culture, one in which we are prepared to fail and learn from failure. So those are just a few, just one or two tasters of the fascinating aspects of an innovation culture. And then collaboration is inevitable when we are innovating. And the reason for that is we don't have all the knowledge we need. We're going to have to work with other people. We're going to have to collaborate both internally and externally. We'll collaborate for knowledge sharing, competence sharing, even sharing infrastructure. And of course, many of you have heard the term open innovation. And one of the sensitive issues that occurs when we're collaborating is the ownership of intellectual property. So now you're starting to see some of the things that we have to bear in mind as we develop an innovation management system. At ISO 56002, it goes into a lot of detail in all of these elements. So to summarize, in Clause 4, we use a SWOT analysis to identify issues. In the case of 9001, you focus on threats and weaknesses that create risk. In 56002, we focus on opportunities. And remember, 56002 is a guidance document, so there's an enormous amount of knowledge in there that enables us to develop this Clause 4. And I've just emphasized the importance of culture and collaboration. When we get to Clause 6, that's where we will actually address, and you'll notice it says opportunity and risk, not risk and opportunity. So now we're into the leadership clause. And the first two sub-clauses, very similar to 9001. There's a general clause, which is pretty standard text in all ISO management systems. The job of leadership is to take those issues that were found in context and set direction for the organization. Set strategy. You'll see strategy on the list here, and I'll come to that in a moment. But as part of our alignment with 9001, the general clause, almost identical. Then, where 9001 has customer focus, we focus on new value. And that's what innovation creates, new value. Personally, I prefer the word new benefit. And looking at the future state, not looking at what is our end product going to be, but what is our organization going to be. And then finally, and most importantly, setting a strategy which is going to be flexible. And you'll have heard the word agility used so much these days. An innovation strategy is constantly flexing, constantly pivoting. That's the word that is often used. You'll find innovation policy integrates with quality policy very easily. And in fact, I find many of the organizations I've worked with already have innovation integrated into their quality policy. And you'll notice the last item here, roles and responsibilities, where responsibilities is shown in red. Well, that is because there are going to be a lot of new responsibilities when you're setting up innovation management. And again, the standard gives you a lot of guidance on that. But let me go into strategy in a bit more detail. The strategy that you develop has to align with your vision and your policy. That's pretty common sense in business strategy. And what we do in strategy is initially define what are the opportunities we see. We don't yet know what the solutions are going to be. We may say that we're going to focus on particular types of innovations, such as product or service. We may, in the early days, just do incremental innovation, but we may perhaps have a strong history and go for radical innovation. And the strategy we set, and this is another important issue, for innovation has got to be compatible with the strategic direction of the organization. And you know, when you write a strategy, you may have it in a couple of formats. You might have a very detailed strategy with some confidential elements, but you also need a strategy that you can share with people generally and engage and inspire them. And particularly if you're going to partner with other people. And within the strategy, we'll be setting objectives and milestones. And I'll come to that in more detail in Clause 6. But again, you'll see it emphasizes the strategy must be flexible. So, summarizing the integration of Clause 5, vision and strategy are additional to policy. Strategy must be agile. Policy, you will find, integrates very easily with 9001. And a word of caution, responsibilities will need very clear definition because there are going to be a lot of new roles. So now into Clause 6, the planning. In many ways, this is the pivotal clause in the standard, and those who've had experience of 9001 will know that this is where a lot of the work goes on. An important difference. In 9001, we talk about risk and opportunity, whereas in 56002 and ultimately 56001, when we get the requirement standard, excuse me, here in innovation, excuse me, I'm going to just have a sip of my cup of tea here. Okay, I think I'm back on my game. Thanks for your patience again. So here we find opportunity and then we evaluate the risk that associates. Clause 6.2, very similar to 9001. And then you'll notice a couple of additional clauses, structure and then portfolio. And I'll come to those shortly. So I'm going to jump into 6.2 and show you what an objective matrix might look like. If you look at 9001, this is a critical document because it's where you start to address the risks that attach to an organization. In innovation management in 56002 and again later in 56001, this is where you will set your innovation objectives, your initial strategy will be detailed. And Clause 622 is in the common high-level structure and gives some very basic but very valuable structure to setting objectives. So this is where I wanted to really spend my time in Clause 6. The additional clause on structure, quite important, because one of the things we've learned about innovation is that structure is going to probably have to change. We need generally a flatter organization. We need generally an organization with more freedom. And there are different ways of addressing that. A lot of companies spin off innovation as a separate business. That's got benefits, but it's got challenges because communications become more difficult once you spin off. Another common approach is self-managed teams, and of course currently the fashionable term has become agile teams, and I'm sure some of you have experience of that. That's something that's been around for many, many years, and the company I always quote as having really, should we say, set the standard on self-managed teams is W.L. Gore, the makers of Gore-Tex. Bill Gore, back in the 1950s, would you believe, was the initiator of self-managed teams. And, you know, he's a past generation. The Gore family is still deeply involved. It's a multi-billion-dollar business, one of the most innovative businesses in the world, in big part because of the way they've structured themselves. Another way of addressing structure is simply by subcontracting. or partnering. And Procter & Gamble did that years back under their CEO, A.G. Lafley, where they subcontracted all their creative work to a company called Incentive. And then portfolio management is the output of the planning work. And this is because you're probably going to have a number of choices that you're going to pursue at this point in your innovation strategy. So you're going to use your portfolio as a major tool for executing strategy. And your portfolio will show risk versus return for each of your options that you're pursuing, the people, the funding, all of that. Very importantly, though, a key part of an innovation portfolio is the criteria to terminate. This is one of the toughest jobs in innovation. It's saying goodbye to something you love. And, you know, we have to do that when we innovate. We inevitably are going to have to let go of some of our options. But the portfolio also communicates progress to the leadership of the organization. It enables us to keep evaluating performance. It enables leaders to adjust strategy. So, summarizing clause 6, the opportunity assessment has to be numeric, very important, even at this early stage. High risk attaches to innovation, we all know that. And so we manage it. We don't avoid risk. Innovators know that. We need measurable objectives, again, even at the early stages. Structure may change, and you use the portfolio to deploy the plan. So a number of significant extras here in clause 6. Then in clause 7, support. Very strong alignment with 9001. All the items in blue that I keep showing are where there is common structure with 9001. However, there are a lot of extra components within these major clauses, and you'll see in black at the bottom of the page the extra clauses that have been added in. So resources first. And you see the additions that have been put in. The people clause gets far more attention than 9001. We've added in clauses on time, time usage and finances. You can integrate clause 7.1 with 9001 actually quite easily. But there's a clause in 9001 on knowledge which gets very limited attention. In the Innovation Management Standard, this is huge. Knowledge is the fuel of innovation. It gets a lot of attention. It doesn't go as far as to, should we say, detail knowledge management, but it gives you the bones that you need for a skeleton of knowledge management. Another area that needs a lot of attention in innovation is, of course, infrastructure. And you know, you're going to be looking at IT infrastructure to facilitate your innovation activity. So when we integrate clause 7, competence, I skipped over that just now, that is going to be identified in much more detail, and 56002 gives you a lot of guidance here, the sort of competences you need. Not just creativity, project management competences for execution, research both in market and product. All of these competences are critical for innovation. Awareness, obviously important. Communication. People want to know how we're doing as we progress through innovation projects. And then our old friend documented innovation, which appears in all the ISO standards. And you know, I'm shifting. I'm a bit of a heretic. I'm the enfant terrible. I may not sound like it, but yes, I am. I'm shifting from calling this documented information to calling it information management. Think about it. And these 3 additional clauses here, tools and methods, which is really just a general clause, strategic intelligence, which is about gathering knowledge, and IP, which for me is the most important addition in this section. As a member of the division, you'll be familiar with our website where you can go and find what kind of an innovator you are. And, you know, this is a very useful tool to add in your competency assessments. So getting into operation, which is the doing part of the cycle, this is where we detail the innovation process. And the innovation process looks like this. This is a simplified version of the model which appears in the standard. But essentially, we find opportunity, we develop concept solutions, what we often call ideation, we validate, we test whether a concept is feasible, and then we develop a working solution, which we then deliver. I prefer the word deliver to the word deploy, which is what the standard uses. So just going into these steps in the process in a bit more detail. Opportunities we find, you're probably wondering where's 831. That's just a general introduction clause. The first action clause is opportunities. And this is where techniques such as ethnographic studies, focus groups, many, many different things that we can do to find the stated and, very importantly, unstated needs in the marketplace of not yet customers. And this is where we prioritize which of these opportunities do we think are going to work best for us. And this is where we create the problem statement or the challenge. Many people prefer the challenge. And generally speaking, people who are good at identifying opportunities are not so good at defining the problem specifically. That tends to be the problem solvers. And in our world of quality management, we're pretty good. You may not think it, but yeah, we're ahead of the crowd when it comes to problem solving. And problem solvers have had a lot of training in defining problems. What innovation has brought to the table is creative problem solving. Yes, the traditional analytical methods, fine, 8D, 5Ys, all of that stuff, but creative problem solving has got much bigger scope. And that is how we find solutions that we thought were never even possible. And once we've found alternative solutions, and by the way, I'm going to quote Linus Pauling, the physicist. He said, the best way to get a good idea is to get lots of ideas. We need to collect data on the various ideas and then select which ones are going to be best for us in terms of what's our capability, which have got the biggest breakthrough, and which have got the biggest risk. Then we need to see whether these solutions are viable. We validate them. We see whether we can run with them if we've got the resources. Our job now is to reduce uncertainty and develop a working solution. And we test our learning with potential users. And then finally, we deliver. We support the solution. We deliver by using a value proposition. And if you talk to any salesperson, they'll tell you at this point, you talk about benefits, not features. And we monitor adoption. We monitor the impact. And we learn, because once we hit the market, we will learn more and we will find it possible to improve the solution. So integrating with Clause 8 of 9001, you could integrate with 8.3 design. Notice innovation process has got the same number, but I would suggest initially you operate it separately, because this has got a lot more creative components than the design clause in 9001. And then we get to the measurement bit. And here you'll find alignment very easy indeed. A lot of guidance on the kind of metrics that you should be taking. In the early creative stage, metrics are not easy and they need some careful thought. And I'll come to that in a moment. Internal audit. You know, we've agonized on this one. It's standard text in all ISO standards, but we prefer the term assessment, but we're not going to fight this one. And then management review, again, you'll find aligns very easily with other ISO standards. So I said I would talk a little more about metrics. You need input metrics, number of ideas you're collecting, the sources of knowledge, the performance of your partners, and then throughput. This is pretty standard stuff. Development speed, time to market. And then output, what's working, what's not. How quickly are things being adopted by new customers. And the ultimate metric, of course, is what are the new revenues, what are the new cost savings that we're getting, what's the value of the intellectual property we've created, and what's the return on investment. This slide really condenses significantly a large amount of content in the standard. There's a lot of very useful stuff, particularly at the input end. And so integrating with Clause 9 of 9001, you can build your innovation metrics into your existing dashboard or cockpit chart that you use for 9001. Internal audit, I'm going to suggest that when you first start using 56002, you want to conduct a gap analysis to find out which clauses you need to do most work on. And I've already said, integrating with management review should be relatively easy. And the last clause, improvement. And this introduces an intriguing new word, the word deviation. What's going to happen when we innovate is we're going to get outcomes that are not expected. Good example is the Post-it note. That was originally an adhesive being developed by 3M and it didn't stick. But a friend of one of the people on the development team was looking for something that he could peel off a piece of paper. He wanted, you know how we do with Post-it notes now, you want to use a marker in a book or something. He wanted to use a marker in a book. And, well, the story, we know it from there. That's an example of a deviation. It's different from a non-conformance. You could argue, yes, the process didn't work. They didn't get the result. But they did get a result, which was useful. The other clauses in 10, familiar stuff. So integrating Clause 10 with 9001, outcomes are not predictable when we're innovating. Deviation is a difference from expectation, but they are big learning opportunities. The press love these deviations because, you know, they make good stories, but they're relatively small in proportion to the, shall we say, the outcomes that we fight for in the world of innovation, because we know what we were looking for originally and we've been working towards it. And just as a reminder, non-conformance and corrective action are there to address process failure. If we're finding our innovation process is not working as we want it, if we're finding the system's not working as we want it, we need to address that. And through all of this, we're gaining new knowledge, which drives improvement in the system. So we have an opportunity here to integrate quality and innovation management using the common ISO structure. This standard, 56002, has come together through global consensus. It represents a pretty complete capture of innovation. And the future is going to require quality and innovation to coexist. Our jobs are going to change, we must change, and this provides us with big opportunities. This is what an implementation plan might look like. It's just to give you a feel. I would suggest to you that when you first start using this standard, you focus in on Clause 8, the innovation process, and build other stuff around it, and you'll see that this covers the bigger picture, the whole system, starting off with the gap analysis, then going into explaining the standard to the leadership, and then through the context, opportunity, and risk, and strategy. And I would recommend when you start that you develop, you notice I've called it a system description. I'm very cautious of using the word manual. And all the other classic things that we need to deal with, you see down this gap chart. I would suggest that you be doing those things in parallel with looking for an early win by using the innovation process. Go to find an opportunity, ideate for solutions, develop it to a working solution and deliver it. So that little part of the Gantt chart is where I would suggest you initially focus your energy. Do the other stuff, though, at the same time. So, implementing an innovation management system. Strongly recommend that you do a gap analysis first to find out what are the things you need to work on. And if you would like a bit more information about Clause 8 of the standard, that was the innovation process, I've actually just written for the May edition of Quality Progress, it's called Deep Dive, a very detailed outline of the innovation process. You'll see it in your copy of Quality Progress, but if you want a copy of it, a PDF, I'm going to be getting that from my editor very shortly, and I'd be more than happy to send you a PDF of the of Clause 8 entitled Deep Dive. So can I thank you all very much? I've gone a couple of minutes over, but made it, and I'm going to have another sip of my cup of tea now. Thank you for your patience, as first of all I was slow getting started, and partway through I had a bit of a coughing fit, but we made it. Dawn, back to you.
Thank you very much again, Peter, for your great presentation. If I got worried, can have like a few minutes break for your voice if you drink. Yes. So you can post your questions in the Q&A section of the WebEx tool, and I should remind you that you can find the recording of this webinar on ASQ Innovation Division YouTube channel. So we are waiting for some questions to be posted. So I can see one question has been posted. The question is, what are the, I can get the question, what kind of job opportunities might arise from this standard?
Okay. I think our world is changing, as we all know, quite dramatically at the moment. And there are enormous new job opportunities as a result of innovation, not necessarily as a result of this standard. Innovation is bringing us into the world of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so forth. And I'm going to be actually presenting at World Conference on that very subject. And one of the things I do point out is that we shouldn't just focus on developing our skills in STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. We should also balance those with skills in emotional intelligence, creativity, and very importantly, complex problem solving. I would suggest that an understanding of complexity, an understanding of complex problem solving is going to be one of the things that quality professionals will very naturally fit into. I don't say it's going to be easy, simply because it's complex. But I would strongly encourage people to pursue that field of knowledge anyway. In terms of specific jobs as a result of this standard, clearly the job of the quality manager has got an opportunity to expand into innovation management. 10 years ago, you never saw the term innovation manager. Now you see the term Chief Innovation Officer and equivalent terms all over the place. So there are many specific jobs. I would suggest also project management is going to be a necessary skill set that we need to have more at the execution end. And I would suggest that for people involved in the world of quality and where innovation is not yet happening in your company, keep an eye open and see where new opportunities are arising and get yourself in on the ground floor. Okay, Dawn, have we got any more questions, Shelley?
Thank you. Yes, there is another question that has been posted. So the question is, what are other innovation management systems that can be compared to the one just presented?
There are other systems that have been developed, but this is the only one that is global. A number of organizations over the last 5-10 years have developed management systems, but our experience in developing this one is that the body of knowledge in innovation, if you go back 10 years ago, was very open to disagreement. There were a lot of differing opinions. The Europeans, for instance, developed a standard back in 2010, and that was one of the inputs we used when we developed this standard, the ISO standard. And we saw how thinking had changed so much in that decade. And so I think it's fair to say what we've got here is the current body of knowledge, and I think it's fairly well established. You know, I keep on top of current thinking, regularly reading Harvard Business Review, which I think represents the cutting edge on thinking. And I think we can say that the knowledge on innovation has converged pretty well. So you've got what you might call the state-of-the-art standard with this one. Okay, Don, anything else?
Thank you. So I guess there is no more question. Actually, I have one question. So you mentioned the portfolio management is related to the structure of the organization. And is it also about determining like the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and the threats in the organization?
The portfolio management is the output of the planning document, of the planning clause. It's the output of the planning clause. It's where we list what our choices are, what are the risks attached to each of those choices, what is the potential return on investment for each of the choices that we have, and who is going to be responsible for pursuing them, who is the project lead, who's on the project team. So it's what you might call the working document for deploying the various innovation projects. And you may recall that I mentioned the importance of having the criteria for killing a project. Never pleasant, but it has to be done. We have to make choices. And as we go through the innovation process, we find, we learn, the risk changes. Part of the innovation process is about reducing uncertainty. As we reduce uncertainty, we reduce risk. So the portfolio is really the core document, and it's how we manage the innovation process. I hope that answers the question there, Dawn.
Yes, very well. Thank you very much. So if there is no more questions, because I cannot see any questions recently posted, if there is no questions, we can end this event. Thank you everyone again, and thank you so much, Peter, for your presentation. And thank you all again for joining this webinar, and have a very good night.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.